Hello, we hope you're doing well and staying safe. These are difficult times. Definitely an important time for a conference about global and critical literacy. We wish we could all have been there in person to share ideas and plan together for the future.
We want to thank UT Austin, Hemispheres, and all the organizers for inviting us to participate in this institute. We hope you will all find our presentation interesting and thought provoking. And we hope that our presentation will generate ideas for your different teaching contexts.
Have you ever been to the Blanton Museum of Art in Austin and seen the sculpture Border Crossing by Luis Jimenez? It's a tribute to his parents and other immigrants who have taken great risks and made tremendous sacrifices to protect their families. The sculpture is a monument. It's a monument, but probably it's not like the kind we're used to seeing, like in front of a government building or a public park.
In a similar way, the book that has inspired this presentation is a tribute. We see it as a monument of sorts, one that, like Jimenez's sculpture, invites the reader to consider counter narratives and honoring of people who are often overlooked by the powerful in society and largely ignored in school curricula and contexts, specifically children's literature. My Poppy Has a Motorcycle by Isabel Quintero and illustrated by Zeke Pena. My Poppy Has a Motorcycle. From him, I've learned words like carburetor and cariño, drill, and dedication. In the book, a girl named Daisy with her father, who is a carpenter and an immigrant, ride through their city passing neighborhoods and familiar businesses. From the moment they are leaving their driveway and her mother yells, "Con cuidado, be careful," the sights and sounds reflect the bilingual and bicultural place. Even the dogs bark with woof woof and wow wow. Daisy waves as they pass the house of her abuelos, who call out to her lovingly in Spanish. Through the text and illustrations, readers are taken on a tour of a city that is changing. They ride past the tortilleria and the carniceria and go by a mural that depicts immigrant farm workers picking citrus and organizing for justicia. When they get to Don Rudy's Raspados, the entrance is boarded up and it's out of business. Daisy notices her Poppy looks disappointed. They stop at a construction site where new houses are replacing the last of the citrus groves. They are greeted by the painters, drywallers, and floor layers. Her Poppy's voice raises above the construction sounds. "Trabajando duro, muchachos." A man in a hard hat with a hammer replies, "A little bit, not too much." The word gentrification is not used in the book, but it could be implied. As they cruise the neighborhoods, she thinks to herself, "I feel and hear everyone and everything we pass by. Each sound landing in my ears rebuilds whole neighborhoods inside me. No matter how far I go from this place or how much it changes, this city will always be with me." A realization. The community is not just where she lives, it is a part of her. It is a part of her history and her identity. Things can change, but she knows who she is and where she is from, and she feels pride. In the author's note at the end of the book, Quintero talks about her experience as a girl in Corona, California, where a pa would take her for rides on his motorcycle after he came home from work. She talks about history and change, about the tortilleria and the raspado shop that are no longer there, and the immigrant laborers who helped establish the city. She asks the questions: who are the people who build our cities and form our communities? Who are the people who get streets named after them? And who are the people who lay the asphalt? She states that this book is a love letter to her father and to her city, both who will always be a part of her. When Daisy and Poppy arrive back to their home, Daisy reflects, "I think about my city and all the changes that it's been through, and all the changes that will come. But I know that here in our little house, there are things that will always stay the same." Is there any wonder why this book won the 2020 Tomas Rivera Children's Book Award?
This tree is in San Marcos, Texas. It has been in this spot for a long time. Changes have happened all around it since the time it was a tiny sapling. If it could talk, what stories would it tell? But the story of this place starts way before this tree sprouted from the ground. This story starts with water springing from an aquifer, the mouth of a river that sustains life. Wild rice sways in the current, providing a home for many species of animals, such as the blind salamander, an endangered species. But it wasn't always in danger of extinction. The river, with its abundant life, has been a magnet for people. People settled around the springs and have lived here continuously for over 15,000 years. Tecan, Spanish, English echo through this land that has been colonized and claimed by Spain, Mexico, Texas, and the United States. Changes have come to this land at the hands of people, often violent, oppressive, and trying to erase those that came before them. However, if you look closely and you listen, you can see and hear the layers of history past and in the making. The colonizers have not been able to fully erase those who came before. We start this ride at the birthplace of a river, a sacred springs, one that has come to symbolize the struggle of people and the ever-changing landscape of this town. Coahuiltecan ancestors are buried beneath this earth. The land around the springs was purchased by Edward Burleson in the 1840s. Should this land be private property? Who really had the right to own it? Burleson was from North Carolina. He came to this area in 1830, when this was officially part of Mexico. Burleson displaced native people who already lived here. He is famous for the murder of indigenous people and Mexicans. He was the third vice president of the Republic of Texas, and later, when the United States claimed this land, he became a state senator. Following in his terroristic footsteps, his son became a Texas Ranger, and he fought with the Confederate Army during the Civil War. Burleson built a dam that created what's known as Spring Lake. He dammed up the waters to make a mill, a grist mill for grains, and a sawmill for wood. Burleson made a lot of money from his businesses. This building where the mill once stood has changed hands many times over the years. It no longer serves as a mill. It's been a number of different restaurants in recent years. It sits empty now. It's getting remodeled. Soon it will be the new location of Kirby Lane Cafe, bringing a little more of Austin to the town of San Marcos. Much later, Spring Lake was a famous destination for tourists. Called Aquarena Springs, it had a hotel, an amusement park. There were even mermaids, and a diving pig whose name was Ralph. Now it's an environmental education center. Next we ride to the downtown area. Here is the Hays County Courthouse. It is the center of what is called the square. Edward Burleson and other white settlers declared this the town center. In front of the courthouse is a statue of a Texas Ranger. The ranger depicted was named John Coffee Hays. The county is named after him. It was Burleson who had the county named after his friend John Hays. Hays was originally from Tennessee. He fought alongside Andrew Jackson in the War of 1812. Like his friend Burleson, he came to this area in the 1830s so he could fight to take the land away from Mexico. And, like Burleson, he terrorized and murdered many indigenous people and Mexicans. Hays distinguished himself for his brutality and is honored in the Texas Rangers Hall of Fame. Why did the people of San Marcos decide to make a monument honoring Hays in 2001, so many years after his death? We ride west from the square, past the big historic houses, reminding us of a time of wealth and grandeur. These houses most certainly were made with the wood hewn in Burleson's mill at the headwaters of the San Marcos River. We see street signs like Hopkins and Hunter and Burleson. These streets mirror names etched in stone in the cemetery that bears the name of the town. What criteria deems someone so important that a county or a street gets their name? What about the many other people who once lived here? Who were the people not recognized with a statue? Who were the families that have no street signs remembering their names? People recognize the value of naming things. Names remind us of histories, but we need to think carefully about the deep meanings attached to the names and the narratives that go with them. The tensions of colonization, nostalgia for an official history, or a reclamation of people's history that can offer counter narratives. Names can symbolize a reclaiming of story. Names matter. Stories matter. Moving south, we ride down Martin Luther King Jr. Street through the Dunbar neighborhood. This is also historic, but the houses are not as large. This was the traditional African American neighborhood in San Marcos. Named for one of the most famous poets San Marcos has known, Lawrence Dunbar. Dunbar was born in 1873 and lived until 1906. He published his first poems when he was only 14. He wrote poetry in formal English, also called Standard English, and he wrote in African American vernacular English, making poetry that sounded like the way people in the community spoke. This is Dunbar Park. These basketball courts are named for Lucius Jackson. Jackson was born in San Marcos in 1941. When he went to what was called the Colored School, that was right here on this site. When Jackson was high school age, he was not allowed to play basketball for the San Marcos High Rattlers because of racist policies. He moved away from San Marcos so he could play high school ball. He went on to be a college star, played in the 1964 Olympics, and was a star on the Philadelphia 76ers, helping them win the NBA championship of 1967. Next to the courts is the recreation center. It was renamed the Dunbar School in 1960s, a school for black children during segregation. Ola Lee Coleman went to this school as a child and then went back as a teacher. She was a beloved educator at the school for 36 years. A few blocks past the Dunbar Park is the First Baptist Church of San Marcos. The church was originally built in 1866, and it was a religious and social center for black people in San Marcos. In 1873, this fixture of the African American community was burned to the ground by the KKK. Years later, in 1908, the church was rebuilt by its loyal parishioners. We wonder what those Klan members taught their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren to believe. Where did their beliefs go? What do they look like today? How do they impact our beliefs? In addition to being a place of worship, this church building was also home to the local chapter of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Civil rights meetings were held here through much of the 20th century. This once grand place of worship has been vacant since 1986. In 2020, in the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, Renee Perez, an artist who's from San Marcos, painted these words as a call to the community. We sure can use this reminder right now in San Marcos and the entire country. Next to the church building is the house of Ulysses Cephas. He was born in 1884. His parents had been enslaved by white Texans. Cephas learned to be a blacksmith from his father. Eventually, Cephas owned his own blacksmith shop and was well known in the whole county for being great at shoeing horses and for creating the best quality wagons and farming implements. He was a respected community leader and an active member of the church. Across from the Cephas house is the Calaboose African American History Museum. It was organized in 1997 by Mrs. Johnny Armstead. The museum has a permanent collection as well as a rotating gallery showcasing exhibits and events to preserve history and educate the community. Going a bit further south, we enter Southside. This was a historically Mexican American and Mexican neighborhood. In 1942, the Sociedad Cuauhtémoc was formed by the Reverend José Flores. They held their first 16 fiesta and parade in 1946. People in the community created floats for the parade. Different families managed booths selling specialties like hamburgers, tamales, chalupas, raspados, and cotton candy. Bingo was also a big part of the event. The Sociedad hosts dances and raises money to support the community with scholarships and helping with medical expenses and other things. Cuauhtémoc Hall became a famous dance hall. People came from far and wide to hear Tejano greats. Little Joe, Ruben Ramos, and Selena even played here. During the time of poll taxes, when people had to pay money to vote, Cuauhtémoc Hall promoted voter engagement by holding dances where the price of admission was the same as the price to vote. If people showed their voting receipt, they got in free to the dance. Today, we no longer have poll taxes, but the same people are trying to suppress voting rights. One thing for sure, La Sociedad Cuauhtémoc will be promoting voting awareness and rights for La Raza de San Marcos. Cuauhtémoc Hall is still the place to come for dancing, quinceañeras, and having a great time with family and friends. And the Sociedad still raises supports for the community with scholarships and other civic engagements. A few blocks away is the Centro Cultural Hispano de San Marcos. In 1901, this building was a school for African American children in San Marcos. Later, it became a segregated school for Mexican American children. The school was called Southside School, and then the name changed to Bonham. In 1965, it became one of the first schools in Texas to have a bilingual program in Spanish and English. Today, the building is a cultural center known as the Centro. They host music and art classes, as well as STEM education camp and other educational and cultural events. Down the road a bit is the building of the La Victoria Grocery. It closed around 5 years ago. The sign reminds us of a vibrant neighborhood that is changing. Artist Rene Perez recently restored the painting. He said it may be the oldest mural in San Marcos. It's a portrait of a woman whose name was Elena. She was the sister of the people who owned La Victoria. She originally painted it as a self-portrait as part of a parade float in the 1970s, probably for one of the 16 parades. All over town we see changes. Tall condo buildings that span city blocks are popping up from one day to the next. New restaurants and bars crop up all around. With the new construction, we see workers in hard hats, operating equipment, carpenters, bricklayers, painters. Many of the workers are immigrants from Mexico and Central America. Who are the people who build our cities and form our communities? Who are the people who get streets named after them? And who are the people who lay the asphalt? Things change. It's not always for the good. It's important to remember the past, who we are, and where we come from. If you listen carefully, you'll notice that the past is not past. There's just constant change. What roles will you take in our changing world? What monuments will you create? Who will they honor?